Okay, well, they're bringing in some additional chairs. We're gonna go ahead and get started. So my name's Rachel Holberg. I am on the Idaho VOAD board. I'm the vice chair. And then in my regular job, I'm actually the emergency manager of the city of Boise. So this is very near and dear to my heart to have all of you here because we are so grateful for everything you do for the emergency management community. And so what we ask is for some of our emergency managers from various locations to come here today and talk about capabilities and the demographics of their areas. And what we really want to get to is how areas vary. So no area is the same in the needs that they may need from you or the answers that they may have. So we're gonna have them talk about their different areas and then open it up to all of you to ask great questions and for them to ask questions of you and learn about some of the other things that might be available out there that we're not aware of as of yet. So I'm gonna go ahead and have them introduce themselves.
Crash Marusich, Ada County Emergency Management and Community Resilience. I'm the Deputy Director there.
My name is Chris Corwin. I am the emergency manager for Blaine County, Idaho. For those who are not familiar with Blaine County, that is where the Sun Valley Resort is.
I'm Adam Gonzalez. I'm the emergency manager from Fayette County, Idaho. It's right on the Idaho-Oregon border. So if you jump on I-84, right before you cross the Snake River, that's where we're at.
So let's go ahead and kick it off and start talking about Ada County.
Okay, Ada County, Idaho, where you are currently, home of our capital, Boise City. Of course, we did not have Boise City in Boise County. We like to make sure you stay confused if you're not from here. So Boise County is our neighbor, just north of us here a little bit. Our current population estimate is around 535,000-ish, depends on who you listen to, who you talk to. From 2020, or excuse me, from that should be actually 2000 to 2024. Wow, not 2020, that'd be really quick. Anyhow,
I was like, wow, that's a lot of growth.
we've about in 24 years, we almost doubled in size. To give you some idea of what's going on here, we had 85% growth in that 24-year period. So yes, we are definitely an urban area. We are also the most isolated community of our size in the lower 48 states. So there isn't another community as large as we are that's as far away from another community similar to our size as we are. We're all by ourselves. So this is why all of you are very important. When people ask us who's coming, we're like, it's us. We're the help that's coming. There isn't, if you're not in the room, you're not going to make it in time after an event. So it's really important that we have relationships with all of you. I want to do a kind of a real quick brief review of some things that have happened with our VOAD partners here in Ada County. In 2017, we did have a presidential declaration for flooding. We had the Boise River at flood stage over 100 days. Presidential declaration 4342. Red Cross opened a shelter for us actually 3 separate times at the Church of the Nazarene. We had evacuated a mobile home park. We had 510 volunteer hours between both Ada and Canyon counties. The Red Cross, like I said, they opened a shelter which operated roughly 12 days. Not a lot of folks showed up, but they were there. They also assisted us with casework and recovery efforts. So Red Cross was critical in that particular event. LDS Charities. Okay, what do they do for us? Well, here's one particular case where they brought in, I don't know how many kids, and they loaded 1,600 sandbags to try to defend an area in Garden City from something we jokingly called the Wandering Willow. There was this tree that was moving downstream periodically during the flood high waters, had this giant root ball. Every place it stopped, that root ball would back water up and it would flood someplace. So Garden City suffered from that. And of course, LDS Charity stepped up and helped us out. But more importantly, with that particular group, we had folks that were not able to provide sandbagging for their own homes. And we as the government were actually not allowed to step on private property and sandbag their homes. So I could pick up the phone and call our representative from LDS Charities, and like 30 kids would show up in sandbags and shovels, and off it would go, and the house would be sandbagged. But more importantly for us, I would have said, well, it was nice that you did that, but when the flooding's over, someone's got to pick them up. They can't be left in the floodplain. And they're like, that's not a problem at all. They took care of all that for us, which was amazing. Again, much more flexible than the government can be, far more helpful. Another great example of that actually was as we were evacuating or preparing to evacuate at a larger level an area of Eagle Island. For those of you not familiar with what that is, the Boise River splits. There's a north and a south channel that comes back together, this giant sandbar in the middle of the two splits. is a place we call Eagle Island. Lots of really nice high-end homes there, but there's also quite a bit of rural still left on Eagle Island. And there were horses and cattle that were gonna get really wet if the water kept rising. And we thought the water was gonna keep rising. So I called the Bureau of Land Management. They've got this giant pasture area south of the airport. And I said, hey, you wanna move some horses and cattle? And they went, no. Government can't help government in this case. They had some other issues going on, couldn't assist us. Picked up the phone, called LDS Charities, and they said, how much pasture land do you need and how much hay? I told them that that's not a problem. Now, we didn't end up having to move the cattle, but again, it was a VOAD partner that stepped up and was able to fill that gap for us because we were not able to find a government partner that could assist us. All right. The mobile home park I mentioned earlier that flooded. We asked the people to evacuate. In Idaho, you can't mandate an evacuation. Well, the governor can, but nobody short of the governor can actually mandate an evacuation. So we recommended an evacuation for these people, and some folks left, and some folks didn't. But regardless, the water kept rising inside this mobile home facility, and they sandbagged as much as they could to defend their homes. But all of this was on a septic system. Yeah. So when you have a really difficult project to take on that's literally crappy, who do you call? Team Rubicon, because they'll take on anything. They don't care. They are get after it kind of people. They will jump on it. We called Team Rubicon. We said, hey, there's all these sandbags. They've been sitting in septic. We got them some PPE. They showed up with a bunch of volunteers. We got that stuff loaded up. We got all those sandbags hauled off and properly disposed of back at our landfill. So again, it was a volunteer organization stepped up and filled the gap when we really needed the help to get this kind of taken care of and help these folks get their homes back to normal. Or as normal as it could. Another thing I just kind of want to talk about, we're really hooked in with the Idaho VOAD. It's hard for me to talk about Ada County and the VOAD because it's Idaho's VOAD. Many of them happen to be housed inside our county. I guess that's when we talk about the differences, maybe that's, you know, one of the big differences is you're standing in the Salvation Army's building, and which county is it in? It's here. So when we talk about help coming from the VOAD, quite often the partner organizations are based out of our community. So we have the fortunate connection to, you know, have their help almost immediately. But our office has worked really hard at trying to provide assistance and support to the VOAD. They wanted to have a multi-agency resource center standard operating procedure. They wanted to get that set up. We've talked about it at VOAD conferences multiple times. Our office helped develop a workshop, which we ran in 2018. They actually ran a functional exercise at the VOAD conference in McCall of this MARC, which was awesome. It turned out really well, but we learned a lot from it. So we made the final edits to the MARC SOP, and that was the final draft was submitted in 2020. I cannot encourage all of you enough, if you're not plugged in with your emergency manager, slap them in the head and introduce yourself, okay? The age-old, you know, saying in our profession is you never want to exchange cards over a rubble pile, and that's the truth. We got to know each other before the bad event occurs. We got to be working together before the bad event occurs. We got to be planning and training together before the bad event occurs. So I'm just gonna wrap up by saying, man, this is what we need from the VOAD in the future. Spontaneous, unaffiliated volunteers. We work hard at finding them before the bad event occurs and telling them to go see you. Like, don't be spontaneous or unaffiliated. Please go someplace where you can receive training. Please go someplace that has an organization that can deploy you in an effective way, in a positive way. Find something that's a passion of yours. Find the organization. Maybe you belong to a church. Maybe you belong to a fraternal organization. Maybe you belong to something that already has a national VOAD available. Go to them, join them, get trained by them, work with them. Donations management. Well, I'd love to hear back from you guys at a later date. That's always I have no idea. Anyhow, I'm being honest. That's always a tough one to manage. We will continue to train with the VOAD as a county. Again, they're multi-agency resource center. We just recently completed a county family assistance center annex for our emergency operations plan. And we're still working through what that's gonna look like and how it's gonna work. But there's gonna be a strong tie eventually between family assistance centers and a multi-agency resource center. So having that contact with your organizations now is vitally important and figuring out how those two things work together. And again, I can't emphasize enough how happy we are, how pleased we are, how blessed we are that you guys exist for your resource availability and flexibility. Because again, there were times I had no answers from the government. I'm the logistics section chief from the EOC at Ada County. They like look at me and say, Crash, find an answer, find this thing, find this help. And most of the time I go, forward, because it isn't available other places. So that's it for me. Chris. Oh, you wanna go?
No, yeah, sorry. All I'm gonna say is, being in Boise, obviously, we're within Ada County, and one of the big misconceptions that we have is that we have all the regional assets here. That is true, but they deploy a lot. So even if they are housed here, that doesn't mean they're always here. So if you think about some of your partners, like Red Cross deploys regularly, Team Rubicon, even Salvation Army. So while we have a lot here, they're not always here. So when we do reach out, it's because we've already looked locally and we're still having a gap. And so that's also part of the consideration for us, is it looks like it's really cool, but we don't necessarily have everybody all the time, especially when there's national disasters taking place.
Unless Rachel calls, they do guys show up.
Well,
There's always that. Okay. Chris.
Chris.
I don't have any magical slides.
I don't have any magical slides either, Chris. Don't feel
Yeah,
bad.
they are. One thing I want to point out, though, using his magical slide, as a person who lives in a smaller county. So as I said, for those of you who are familiar, I'm from Blaine County, Idaho. Most people know Sun Valley, Idaho. And of course, then they think, oh, well, you're from Glitter County. The truth is there is about 1,000 people up in the northern end of our county, or kind of actually central part of our county, that are very wealthy. The rest of our county, so much. And at the end of the day, we still only have 25,000 people that are full-time residents in our county. On any day, they estimate between 35 and 45,000 people actually in our communities, due to people commuting in for work, or those, rich people coming and spending time in their second homes. So while it seems like we would have a lot of resources, we in Blaine County don't actually have a lot of resources. For example, we don't have a Salvation Army. We don't have a United Way. We don't have a Red Cross. Our Red Cross is in Idaho Falls. Our Salvation Army, and even, I don't know, this kind of goes back and forth, is supposed to be in Twin Falls. But that office opens and closes according to our Twin Falls emergency manager more often than she can keep track of. So, like if we were to call the Salvation Army, we'd probably be calling the Boise office for that type of thing. United Way, same thing. LDS Ministries, though, has been actually really active in our community. We've used their storage facilities with donation management. In our 2017 flooding, they were also very helpful with some people that needed, for example, just something simple as gas cards, right? Like we had people that needed money to help pump out their crawl spaces, and so they needed gas cards to go get, gas to pump that out. But simple things like that are really helpful for our community. One thing I want to point out, this is big, and this as the chairman of our LEPC in Blaine County, if you are somewhere within Blaine County and you think, I want to come help Blaine County, I want to come help Payette County, get on those LEPC mailing lists and attend those LEPC meetings, because that helps us as emergency managers know that you're willing to be a partner for us. Like I said, we don't have a lot of offices in our county. We have a food bank. They're already maxed out just trying to feed the people within our county as is. So if we actually have a disaster, they're going to be able to help the people they're already helping, and now we got more people that need help. So, like, do I get a hold of Idaho Food Bank? Is there a food bank in Twin Falls? Are they willing to come up and support us? Those are the type of things that I don't know how far people are willing to go when they come to our county. What I find is that a lot of times in our county, and you'll find this probably I think all of Mountain West are probably the same way. Your citizens are very resilient, and they I mean, we had a wildfire in a community, in Smiley Creek, which again is a lot of second homes, but there's a lot of people that have been there for 50 years before it became second home land. And they're just like, well, we're just gonna take your camper and go down to the river and we'll just be there. You can find us. So like every time I have a fire, my Red Cross guy, and of course we have a new one now, but every time I call the guy up, I'm like, okay, be on standby for a shelter. He's like, all right, I'm on standby. And then no one shows up. Because they all go find their own places to go. And so I know I don't know if that's hard for you guys, to deal with. I know for me, it's hard to always keep asking you guys, hey, be on standby. But those are some of the things that we deal with in kind of rural counties in Idaho. And I know I'm not here to give us, I don't know, I guess if anything, it's about opening that conversation about how do we, best manage that so that we have that kind of conversation. But if we can be at LAPCs and we can kind of meet up and we know who's gonna be there when, that would be huge. Yes,
Hi, my name is Susan Collier, and I'm not a coordinator with Utah, and in Utah, we solved that problem.
nice.
So in Utah, we have on average 1% of the population that is vaccinated will show up to a shelter. And as a result, we do not get federal declarations because a dark and stormy night is not dark and stormy. And so the way we solve that is in our state emergency operations center, we have a new web board inside WOC that is connected to a web form, which is connected to a link on the main emergency management page, open to the public. So that when we do evacuations, like we're gonna do, we didn't, but we're gonna do evacuations of a town right next to a dam that was gonna go. And what's happening is anybody who's gonna couch surf, we were gonna announce it, broadcast it, to go onto the website and tell us where you are. Tell us your situation, tell us your needs. And as a result, we were able to be able to capture all of our dark and stormy night tail, even though they didn't show up to Red Cross shelter, and have that ready to go. So we can go to request federal declaration and any other funds, we have our dark and stormy night tail. So we did buttons. So that one button was for spontaneous shelter, that's couch surfing. And we also did donations and volunteers and shelter, like a bunch of other things, missing persons. We've got 6 or 7 different buttons now. That connect to WOC so that the state and the county and the cities can see it.
That's really smart. Thank you. Really appreciate sharing that. Yeah, go ahead.
The question.
Yeah.
When everything goes down in our area, if the great coastal gale, you have no means of communication. All the cell towers are down, and so at that point in time, we depend on our ham radio operators, but that's for life and safety. So it's kind of after the fact, you get to tell your dark and stormy night story, but sometimes it is too late for many folks.
Yeah.
And you don't know where they are. And
Yeah.
you don't know what their condition is, and we become very isolated in a coastal community like Astoria, Seaside, Deer Park, with a whole lot of visitors who don't know where to go or how to accomplish it. So it's kind of that we depend on your CERT teams, your emergency management, and your ham radio operators to figure out that first week, where are you in the scheme of things?
Absolutely. No, we actually do a really good job. We have a very active ham radio club within our community, and they do a really great job of just getting local citizens signed up, because even if you're just on a 2-meter radio and you just get your tech license, you don't even need your general. Just having that tech license, we have 2 local repeaters that they could communicate off of in those situations. So definitely, I'm guessing probably 90% of this room is ham radio also. So talking to the choir. All right, Adam, go ahead. Yeah.
Like I said before, my name is Adam Gonzalez. I'm from Payette County. couple of unique things about Fayette County is we're actually the smallest geographical county in the state of Idaho. We're about the same size as Chris, we just reached our 26,000 mark. We've gotten that big influx of people that, Crash was talking about over the last, 7 or 8 years. We've gone from 22,000 up to the 26, and it's growing considerably. We're nestled just right outside of this Boise metropolitan area, and we have a huge mix of commuters that come into the main area over here of the Treasure Valley for work. And then we actually have a huge agricultural industry in Fayette County. To give you an example, one of the nation's largest producers of onions, sugar beets, mint, and several other products. During Snowmageddon, sorry, what year was that? 2016. Yeah, that was a pretty catastrophic thing where we had multiple snowstorms, one after the other, and it was collapsing agricultural buildings. We had it fall on some of our dairies on top of their cattle. But the biggest notable thing of that is it actually collapsed many of our onion storages. If anybody was watching the onion market at that time, because of the impact that we had in our area, onion prices actually went up 14% nationwide. So that gives you an idea of kind of the agricultural impact we have. We're pretty unique in the fact that whenever drought is talked about in Idaho, Fayette Basin is usually pretty good shape. That's because of the vast mountain range that comes and flows through the Fayette River. However, being a surplus of water all the time isn't a good thing. And so that's one of our biggest vulnerabilities outside of wildfire that we face in our community. Also being a smaller jurisdiction, like what Chris was saying, our local tax base is pretty small. I'm pretty unique in the aspect that there's actually 1.5 of us in emergency management in our county, and that's because of all the lessons that we learned from Snowmageddon and some of the things after that. We realized we were vastly unprepared for that. But we have one fire department that is full-time staff, but they go at home at night, so they're not even a real true full-time agency. All of our other fire districts are run by volunteer 100%. And so we kind of fit in a crux where we're rural, facing all the rural problems, but we are impacted by some of the bigger jurisdictional issues. The other thing that's unique to us is we're right on the Idaho-Oregon border. Right across the river from us is a big community of Ontario, Oregon. And Malheur County butts right up to us, and our community is just intertwined completely. The thing that makes that complicated is rules are different across the state line. So our vulnerabilities shift depending on the political climate of the state. So sometimes we'll have a lot of homeless. Sometimes Oregon will have a lot of homeless depending on what's going on. And so those are some of the things that are unique to us. Going back to Snowmageddon, we relied very much on volunteers during that time frame. As you can imagine, there's a lot of people that were shut into their homes. We couldn't get groceries. We had roadways that were closed. We had cattle that were dying out in the fields. We had onions to dispose of. And the little unknown fact, Fayette County landfill actually services at least 8 counties in our region to be able to provide that. And so that was a huge hurdle to overcome, is how do we dispose of all this stuff? And how do we manage that? So big environmental thing. We're pretty fortunate in the fact, Chris was talking about how Red Cross is an Iowa Falls for him. Our disaster program manager actually lives in our county of Fayette County. And so that's pretty awesome there. We've utilized them. They're a big part of our community, big involvement. We've actually had some discussion of starting a COAD in our little neck of the woods just because of all the community organizations that are active in the Four Rivers area that I was talking about before. Another time we leaned really heavy on VOAD was during COVID. We were being in the rain shadow of Ada and Canyon County. All the resources for COVID were coming to those 2 counties because that's where the population bases were for our 2 health districts. That being said, we had just a couple hundred vaccines that were coming in per week during that time frame. And so we utilized volunteers and a local pharmacy to set up vaccine clinics for thousands of people at a time. And Team Rubicon was actually a group that was able to come in and help us organize, bring manpower to be able to get that, going. Sorry, I just found out that I was presenting when I walked in, so. Questions are always welcome. But, one thing that I really enjoy about living in Idaho is that people always spring forward when something happens. That's something that we try to plan for and try to direct and try and facilitate. So I cannot pound enough the LEPC participation, local emergency planning committees. We use that for our means of communication about what's going on in our community. We use that to stay in touch with everybody. It's a big tool to be able to gather around the campfire and say, what do we have, what do we need, and where are we gonna get there, how are we gonna get there? And that's really important to us because, like has also been mentioned, nobody likes to leave their home. They are always gonna stand and fight as long as they can, and we can't force them to leave. It's pretty unlikely that we'll get the governor to force those people to evacuate. But I think that's okay because, this last year we had it was just under 300,000 acre fire that spanned across Gem County, Fayette County, and Washington County. It was mostly in the rangeland area. However, like I said before, most of our economy is based on agriculture. So all this rangeland for cattle was burned up. And then to put that flip side, you guys heard about the fires in Oregon, and they had the two biggest fires. That was right across the river. I could see that from our courthouse, those flames. And so that was impacting our agricultural area as a whole. But what was amazing to see happen, and this is the unique thing about our rural jurisdiction, is the amount of people that came together to help people move their cattle or horses or get feed in different locations is a huge attribute. And without local volunteers and national partners, we couldn't function. We don't have the resources, we don't have the manpower. And so it's just, it's critically important, the relationship that we have with you all partners in the VOADs. I see multiple different VOAD partners that I've reached out to in small or large situations, and it's just a priceless relationship that I value so much, so.
So I have a questions for the group, actually, because we have multiple states here. How many of you feel, or do you feel engaged to participate in the planning process for your jurisdiction's emergency operations plan? Have they come to you and said, yes, your emergency support function 6, we want to hear what your capabilities are, we want to incorporate you into our EOP, what does that mean? Emergency operations plan, I'm sorry if I acronym you and I don't say it, just hit me, it's okay, people do all the time. Yes.
Problem that I run into is that the leadership of the state emergency operations center, the state emergency manager, they want us to use liaisons to communicate with the counties, which means I have been blocked from talking to my emergency manager directly, which obviously is a lot, but they don't want me to coordinate and plan with the counties by myself. Does that make sense? So that has created some issues. And so we're working on overcoming them, but at the same time, what it's doing is it's forcing me and all the other ESFs in the state EOC to go through a middleman to coordinate with the counties and the cities. And as a result, it's just time consuming, it's not functional. You know what I mean? You don't do a monkey game where you say something and it gets lost in translation. That has happened more than once.
I feel your pain and working in logistics, I can promise you, I had a bad habit of letting the paperwork catch up. I would call the volunteer agency directly and go, hey, can you? They go, sure. I'm like, okay, paperwork, hang on. Yeah, let's look at this. There's the resource request, it's official and it's being met by these people. Awesome, all right. Next. Because, every now and then people need help now and there is paperwork will catch up. Yes.
My pen says, I may be a tiny potato,
Yes.
but I'm part of the solution. So in trying to be part of LEPC in my county, Clatsop County in Oregon, is very difficult because, see, I don't have a badge. well, I don't have a fancy hat. I mean, I do represent Oregon VOAD and long-term recovery teams and Lutheran disaster response. But apparently, that's not enough blame for being part of epilepsy. And it is
I'm not
a
trying. that.
detriment, you know, to those folks, knowing what we as non-governmental agencies, faith-based organizations can do in planning for the next disaster or the disaster, or being part of all that training in blue skies. So do you have a nice hat for me or a badge? that, you know, I can wear and get in the door?
We can give you one from Idaho, but we don't know if it'll work in Oregon. You can get it to us.
It'll work
Yeah. There we go.
I'm not understanding. I mean, we're very fortunate. We have a large dysfunctional emergency management family here in Ada County. We have our office, which is the second largest emergency management office in all of Idaho. The first being the state, which is currently about 48, 42. And so it goes from 42 down to 5.5.
Right.
And we have Boise City, which they're staffed at 2.
Hey,
we have, we have,
we're the third largest.
well, no, Kootenai County. I think
Oh,
that's-
that's right.
Kootenai County has- But I'm honestly, as an emergency management person, I'm not understanding. Everyone's welcome to our LAPC. As a matter of fact, by state law, everyone, federal, everyone is invited to an LAPC. You don't have to have any credentials. You can be John Q. Public. You could be the local whatever rat catcher. It doesn't matter. Everyone is legally allowed into an LAPC meeting, and if they're not playing with you, I'm only sorry for them. Because that's a
Yeah.
that's a big loss to that emergency management organization, if they're not planning with their partners, that's not good.
I would say that is a really heartbreaking thing, and is this a conversation that you've had with your VOAD board in the state to talk about working with those emergency managers through some of these hurdles?
You know, I have a real good relationship with our Oregon Office of Emergency Management, Norval, Quinn Butler. And a relationship now that I'm building with Jen Munson, who is the public outreach of the Clatsop County Emergency Manager, and kind of building a VOAD. But an invitation to a LEPC meeting seems to be elusive. And it's not that they don't know who I am, but it just seems to be elusive. So I just was looking for advice.
Sure, absolutely.
There's a hand up front that might have.
Well, no, I'm kind of thinking the same thing. It's a lot of, I listen to you three and it just is so inspiring to say, oh, there can be good relationships between government and non-governmental agencies. But whether it's been bad actors on the part of VOADs of the past or whatever, I know a lot of them will say, well, we're trained, we know what we're doing. And don't necessarily want to have the partnership with the VOADs unless they absolutely have to. Or in other areas, it may be, well, we'll work with Red Cross, but we don't know about the interfaith community. Well, we don't know about, we're not sure about, and they'll just start putting people out. So it would be really helpful if you could tell us, besides just talking to them, because I feel what you're saying. I happen to be on the inside on a few things, but it's because of my other roles, not because of my VOAD role. And so just ideas of how best to approach it so it's not a threatening thing.
Yeah, so a couple things I would say, just because I've run into this too, depending on each jurisdiction's legal advice, right?
Yes.
It gets a little tricky. One thing is LEPC, anybody should be able to participate in LEPC, and honestly, I'll reach out. I'm also the Idaho Emergency Managers Association president. I'll reach out to Astoria and find out why they won't let you attend their LEPC meetings. There's no reason for you not to attend the LEPC meetings. Now, yeah, so the tricky part is when you do get in a disaster, there becomes, responsibilities And if a county emergency manager steps up and vouches for you, and you haven't been, I guess you'd say, for lack of a word, verified, or, been, validated, it gets tricky. Our attorney will say, no, they can't come into your EOC, right, during a disaster. That does get tricky, and I'm not gonna lie, and it's really frustrating as an emergency manager, when I'm like, this guy over here, this agency, like, we have a nonprofit that does horses, right? And they raise their hand during a fire, and they're like, we'll take people's horses. Well, I couldn't coordinate it, because if I coordinated it and some $1 million horse got injured at that horse stable, now it's the county's liability on that. And so my county basically said, nope, if they want to do that, they can put out their own, Facebook post and say, bring your horses, and they can take on that liability, but I couldn't help coordinate through that. But I could still work with that nonprofit and say, hey, yes, please do that. And if people were to say, hey, where do I take my horse? I'd be like, hey, contact Swiftsure, right? And they can do that. So that gets a little tricky. But again, with the LEPC, like, if you're having issues, please let me know, especially in Idaho. If you're having problems in Idaho, let me know. I will go browbeat any county emergency manager as the IEMA president, and get them to attend your LAPC.
Jeremy Max, and I kind of wear two hats, one around the center for kind of living, so we do a lot of access and function. We see this stuff, but also on the VOAD board. And I'm curious from the panelists, we are in our planning kind of charged with getting people to LAPC, engaging in the LAPC process. I get really nervous about just kind of like referring people to the LAPC, because I don't know anything about people with disabilities. Will complain about parking and all kinds of crazy stuff and go to outcome. And I worry sometimes that, like, if we would send someone to you who would be really annoying, not really engage in the process or have the emergency preparedness planning kind of at least a little bit of that mindset, and so things don't get off the rails. And I'm wondering what is the flavor of each of your LEPC meetings in terms of expectations for public involvement? Because the public, unless you get like the unicorn public person who's like, oh, I 20 years of emergency management, I'm retired, I know the ICS and all this stuff, you could get really swirly participation that is time consuming and not helpful. So I'm wondering, and I worry about referring people to you like that, so I'm wondering, what are you doing at the LEPCs, and how do you interact with the public, or do you want the public involved who do not have maybe, one or two steps up in knowledge about the space?
Well, there is the secret handshake. And if they don't know the secret handshake, they don't get it. So, you don't use the secret handshake?
No.
Okay.
We don't talk about the secret handshake.
Sorry.
First rule of LEPC, we don't talk about those.
So
First rule fight.
I can't speak for every place, but by federal law, under Title III, these are meetings open to the public, and ours are actually on our web page
Yes, but then
and
it's.
advertised quarterly with the time and the location and the agenda, because we are staying in compliance with federal law. We can't prevent anyone from coming. Now, the difference, if you're saying who can attend and who we're gonna plan with, those are two very different things. The general public probably is not gonna be one of my great engaged planning partners. They may sit on a committee if we're looking for, public input. If I'm talking about planning, I'm gonna go to Link, or I'm gonna go to LDS Charities, or the Southern Baptist, or I'm gonna go to Team Rubicon. I'm gonna go to an agency or a larger organization and say, okay, let's talk about ESF 6. Let's have a committee, let's have a representative from each of your groups. That's what, if I'm gonna plan for the EOP, that's a different thing than this meeting, but this meeting is 100% open to the public.
Like in my county, most of our meetings are just presentations of topic of some type of preparedness or planning topic. So to have them attend would be awesome, so that they get that knowledge and get that information. And we can, they get to know the chiefs, because most of my participation in a rural county is mostly chiefs, right? I got my ham radio guy that comes, and I did have one citizen that was active for a while. But, other than that, it'd be great to have more people show up, because honestly, when you talk about people with functional needs, like, those are the people that in a rural community is really hard to identify. And it'd be great to know who those people are and help have that, other than what we call frequent flyers, right? The people that are always calling 911, we know what those guys are, but it's the other ones that are very self-sufficient that we don't know, that, you know, we want to be able to help them if they need it, so.
Adam, do you have anything? And then we have tons of them.
Yeah, sure. So like Ada County, we meet quarterly. And so we've always advertised, we've always put out, we've never actually had someone come in for the public, but we always leave a spot on our agenda for public comment and input. So that they have an opportunity. Honestly, the large chunk of our meeting is mostly about, what's going on in the different entities. You know, that takes up the majority of our meeting, so it's more of a, oh, that's what's happening, you know, like, oh, that's what they're working on, you know, and kind of that opportunity to collaborate. We don't bring a presenter in like Chris, we usually have a topic that we're gonna work through a little bit as a group, or like, so for example, our LEPC is coming up in a week or two. We're gonna be talking about the tier 2 reports that were submitted to us this year, right? You know, and so it's gonna be a kind of a dry thing that, you know, if people have questions, we can boil into it more. And, however, I do have a neighboring jurisdiction that they have public come quite regularly, to those meetings. And they've really done a good job of kind of getting to know them, talking to them beforehand. And then, they just sit there and they soak it all in. And then every once in a while, they say, if there's a topic that they participate in, they talk, and sometimes can be a little bit longer, like what you're saying, Jeremy, in the public comment period, but they've worked on that relationship with those individuals. And the nice thing about us is we know who is part of the LEPC, and when someone comes in, it's like, ooh, we got a new face. And we go and see what's going on, see who they are, see what they're there for, what their interests are. And I've had a lot of people ask about our LEPCs, and it's like, yeah, that'd be great for you to come and hear what's going on. And if you have any questions or know who contacts are in different organizations, that could be helpful for you. But this is the group that's gonna kind of try and be the brainchild for solving the problem. And so that kind of doesn't directly answer your question, Jeremy, but we're very good at adapting. And those meetings we're not talking about classified information, right? It's stuff that we want to be common knowledge, and we want to collaborate with other people on. So.
Michelle Whitey, Mennonite Disaster Service. I heard the language verified agency. So what constitutes being verified?
Oh, man, I'm talking to my lawyer. I honestly, I don't even know either, right? Like, I know a lot of it's background checking. And the other second thing would probably be liability insurance, that you have liability insurance and that you have an indemnification. I would say probably, like, just having gone through a lot of contracting with my county, the things that are gonna, indemnification, right? Who's held liable for what? And then just have background checks on your people that you could turn in, and then have an MOU in place beforehand. I think the biggest thing is to have that MOU in advance, right? If you're if you're a VOAD in a county and you're like, I want to be able to do this in this county, go meet with your emergency manager and get an MOU in place. Memorandum of understanding, those people that don't know, official document says who's responsible for what and who's liable for what. And if you take on that liability and that risk, and you have the insurance that shows that you can do that, I think my lawyer would sign off on that.
You can hit on a very important point. Most of the emergency managers I deal with on a regular basis in various counties in our area, more than willing to work with us, talk to us, and help, and they like to know what's out there. In fact, they keep asking us for more and more information, so they know what to expect when they need something. So it's this pre-planning kind of. I think where the real problem comes in is when you guys try to do something and you've got a county attorney, county supervisors, all of those things, where they start to come in and make your life difficult and our life difficult. We represent a third national organization, but to get that taken care of and get these MOUs and those kinds of things, it's taken us several years to get to the point where we're now almost ready to get something signed and taken care of. So it's a process that's difficult, not necessarily because the managers, but the governmental organization, they have to report to.
Okay, we have just a couple minutes.
Okay, and my question is, you talk about developing relationships with separate entities. Isn't that what the VOAD's for, when you become the VOAD and say, I need this, and help you find that? So where does VOAD fit in if you're already doing individual?
That's where the relationships come. We have a,
So, on the VOAD board, yeah, that's what we absolutely do, is reach out to all of the organizations and understand their capabilities. In Idaho, we put together a matrix, which we do need to update, and it has all the contacts, all the different organizations, and then what capabilities they can bring to the table to include regional. So, meaning what area do they serve? Some are local, some are, county, some are, multiple counties, states, national, et cetera. And so we do all that, but we also encourage at the local level, if you have VOADs in like, nonprofit organizations in your area, you should be connecting with them directly without the VOAD board being in the middle of it, because that is your neighbor, that is your residents in your area. So we encourage both, and we're happy to support where we can, but we definitely encourage you being plugged in at that local level and knowing who's in your own community.
Just real quick, when going back to LEPC, when we got together as our county, we had like 6 of us coming, and we thought, what are we gonna do to make it better? And so we started doing every other month or once a quarter, depending on how it was, we started having field trips to the industry and having them host us, take us through what their emergency plan is. And more people start saying, oh, that's interesting. So then, oh, you're going to this manufacturer this time, and you're going over here to this place that has a lot of chemicals. You're going to this hospital, kind of learning what is your role if an emergency happens at this facility, but it's going to spread out. And then that led to us having some trainings, and we do once a year, we do a really big, like tabletop. We bring everybody there. And what's been interesting on that is people, they're so used to their own plan that they don't recognize, well, what's going to happen here? And so, oh, well, the railroad came and they said, if this school is evacuated, you can't cross that line. And what happens over here when that happens? And all of a sudden that spider web comes out of how fast a disaster is going to work. And the school district actually said, well, we should have somebody on our plan then that would help us with transportation. And it was just really fascinating. And now we have we just had our first statewide conference of LEPC, everybody in the state came, and I think we had 200 there. And it was like, oh my, we just can't believe our little baby grew like that, just from offering training, tours, and then exercises.
Thank you. And I apologize, we're gonna run over time, so a quick comment, guys, go ahead.
Our organization was fundraising with Veterans Community Services. We have an MOU with the state. And that should cover everything else. And everything.
That's a great opportunity.
Yeah, I just, recognizing we're almost out of time. I also want you to recognize that, we're 3 agencies here, and every single county, state has elected officials that we report to and guide to. The biggest thing I'd ask is be patient, don't give up, and just be persistent. If there's something you can do to help, don't give up, because whether that emergency manager knows they need you or not, they'll find out soon enough, and you can step in and help. And it's just really, don't give up when it comes to dealing with different ways, and just find ways, observe what they're doing, observe what they're struggling with, and offer help with what they need help with. Find a reason that they might need you.
Maybe offer your VOAD to do tabletop exercise at an LEPC, because that's a great way to build relationships, build trust, show what your capability is, show that you're serious about the process. That's what I love.
And that's what I was gonna end on. So first, I want to thank everybody in here for the conversation, and our emergency managers for being here. This is great, and learning from everybody. And some of the other areas to try and connect on, we're talking a lot about planning in the LEPC. There's also a lot of things that go on every single day that you can connect with and talk to your emergency managers. We have large special events in all of our communities, and we need help. And so volunteer organizations that can assist and be there, handing out water bottles, doing first aid, those are great ways to connect with those, emergency services outside of a planning committee. We also have large scale exercises. We're crashing an airplane at the airport here in a couple months. We're gonna need role players. Like, there's other ways to engage. So please be creative. Ask us about these things. We're gonna call. We need you. So, and we love seeing you. But, we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up. So thanks to everybody for being in here and thanks to our family. Yes. No. It is. Like, we get a chair. If you want a copy of them, get it. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's you.
Training anywhere?
So when we do the rule on training, generally, it's, we have a community emergency response team program embedded in the Meridian Medical Arts University. It's about the only place we train students into life.
So I have, several organizations that want me to come out. And, well, I have been writing, last year, but my schedule this year is insane. I don't know how to get up there because I'm from Washington. And I want to be in my car too.
Yeah,
Because because if I can find somebody else that needs to.
all right, this is your business.
Yes,
Yeah, I'm
it's
just,
a volunteer business.
I'm just, I'm just, who in Cookie County is talking?
County Emergency Management and then, further north. Is our medical reserve corps wanted to do training as well, and I don't know how to do it this year.
No, we'll contact Cookie County and see if we can.
It's not them specifically, but they're in Houston County, and I got her name, I just can't think of it. Off the top of my head, but contact them, we can get somehow in touch with each other.
Okay, yeah. I can see them.
Oh, thanks.
Partly it's the next one.